Hi everyone and welcome back to Musings with Musa. It has been a pretty terrible year overall, but just strictly musically speaking, hasn't been too bad at all. We've got some pretty cool new breakout acts. We've got some career highlights from some more established bands and musicians as well, and some pretty cool collaborative albums too. And we're going to talk about all of them in this video. I'm going to list the 50 best albums or my personal 50 favorite albums this year. Do keep in mind that this only includes studio LPs that were released this year. So things like the Pink Panthers mixtape or the Ethel Kane Perverts EP, or even the pretty cool string of Magdalena Bay singles that came out this year won't unfortunately be included on this list. They're all pretty cool projects, but since we're strictly doing studio albums, we're gonna have to hold off on including those. In any case, let us get started. I have my full list over here. At number 50, we have Hurry Up Tomorrow by The Weeknd. This is the closer to what might just be his final trilogy. It's a pretty massive project, clocking in at about 90 minutes long, with a lot of that same retro synthwave sound that we've seen on the other two albums from this trilogy. At number 49, we have Sinister Grift by Panda Bear. Just a lot of airy, funky, fun synths here, some groovy bass lines, just a fun time all around. At number 48, we have Sable Fable by Bon Iver. I believe this is his first studio LP in about 6 years or so. Kind of goes back to some of that 22 a million experimental folksy kind of production here, and I would say it's some of his more positive and more tender works as well. At number 47, an album that I did not expect I would enjoy as much as I did. It is Addison by Addison Rae, just channeling a lot of Y2K energy, you know, a lot of low-waisted jeans, flip phones, some of that peak Britney pop style of music. I'm still bumping some of these songs on this, like Aquamarine and Headphones On, to this day. At number 46, we have an album that I'm very excited to put on this list, since I feel like I don't get a chance to put a lot of Pakistani artists here. It is Love Language by Ali Sethi. Takes a lot from Sufism, from Bollywood, from Afro-Cuban music, from Punjabi folktales, and just it's banger after banger, with a lot of, you know, variety of styles here. And I would say that the album as a whole seems to deal with this concept of Ishq Mijazi and Ishq Hakiki, and kind of the interplay of these two concepts, which I thought was pretty neat. At number 45, we have Don't Tap the Glass by Tyler, the Creator. Just some fun, sweaty, energetic, very danceable music from Tyler here. Not one of his more conceptually ambitious albums, but with its 28-minute runtime that just breezes through, I can't complain. It's just a fun time. At number 44, we have Rest in Bass by Shay. This is some of the wildest, most outlandish rage music I have maybe ever heard. At number 43, we have Vanisher Horizon Scraper by Quadeca. Honestly, I did not sort of watch Quadeca when I believe he was maybe like a football YouTuber or something, but his trajectory just as a musician has been pretty cool and honestly kind of inspiring. Like the growth he's had, the way that he continues to evolve his sound, the sources that he pulls from. We get hints of experimental hip hop here, we get chamber pop, we get indie-tronica, folk music, a lot of sort of influences here, but Quadeca really is able to make it all his own. And yeah, it's a pretty ambitious concept album with plenty of love poured into it. At number 42, we have Fuck You Skrillex, You Think You're Andy Warhol But You're Not by Skrillex, and again an album that I was not expecting to love as much as I did. I've honestly never been much of a Skrillex fan, but if you, like myself, haven't heard a lot of Skrillex's music or haven't enjoyed a lot of it, you might still like this one. It kind of has some of his older stuff, some new stuff, and for me personally, there were some tracks with some Desi touches to them, like Gulab and Mirchi Test, which really kind of hit the spot for me. At number 41, we have Eusexua by FK Twigs. I am reviewing the first version here. I know there was like a rework version and then the sort of Afterglow version that came out later in the year as well, which I've heard are all pretty good, but just the first version in of itself, maybe not my favorite FK Twigs album, but still it has some pretty danceable tracks, some pretty strong highlights, such as the title track, Drums of Death, Room of Fools, and yeah, it just overall has a vision and it executes that vision very well, and I really can't complain about that. At number 40, we have Viagra Boys by Viagra Boys. And like Cave World and Welfare Jazz before it, we get a lot of that same sort of tongue in cheek. We get a lot of that same sort of tongue-in-cheek lyricism here, and it's just consistently witty post-punk from the Viagra Boys, even if it is a little less overtly political than these past two albums. And at number 39, we have Forever How Long by Black Country New Road. Like a lot of long-time Black Country New Road fans, I myself was a little worried about the direction the band was going to head in after the departure of their frontman Isaac, and not gonna lie, they still have it. This is a pretty nice album. It goes sort of farther away from that original windmill scene direction that the band helped pioneer, actually, and it sort of goes in a bit more of like a baroque, folksier sound here, but still has a lot of charm, a lot of that same brass heavy production here, and some highlights like For the Cold Country. Just see the band's songwriting reach new levels. At number 38, we have Headlights by Alex T. Just a lot of that same sort of Americana-tinged, folksy, psychedelic production that, Alex is now famous for. Doesn't really, again, tread on any unfamiliar territory, but still just does its job pretty well. It's also, I believe, his major label debut and his third album with Unknown Mortal Orchestra's Jacob Portrait. So, we get some of the similar styles and sounds that we've gotten on his past two albums, but still, it's pretty solid work by Mr. Alex C over here. At number 37, we have Double Infinity by Big Thief. Compared to their previous album, Dragon New War Mountain, this is a bit more stripped back, a bit more sort of hippie, folksier kind of music here. We have a collaborative track with New Age pioneer Laraji, which is a pretty sort of standout track on the album. And at number 36, we have Private Music by Deftones. This is just a fantastic return to form for the band. Easily their best work since 2012's Koi Na Yukan. And yeah, we've seen that nu metal has kind of fallen out of favor over the past couple of years, but Deftones is really keeping it alive. They're also expanding their own sound. We get a good variety of songs here, some melodic, more mid-tempo ones, some deeply atmospheric and hard-hitting ones like Milk of the Madonna as well. At number 35, we have Balloonerism by the late, great Mac Miller. This was originally recorded around the same time as his famous mixtape Faces, and we're kind of getting a lot of that Faces style of storytelling here, mixed in with some of the more Circles style of production. So, a lot more jazzier stuff here, but the storytelling itself is just as dark. The sort of closing track here is just incredibly emotional and just such a nice, well put together posthumous album this is. At number 34, we have Sincerely by Kali Uchis. We have Kali Uchis singing about maternal instincts, about yearning for a loved one, about sort of family, about love as consistent action. We see her drawing from a variety of sources as well. We get some Amy Winehouse influences, some Sade, even some Lana Del Rey here. This is overall one of her more lush, pretty sounding and one of her more personal albums as well. At number 33, we have No One Was Driving the Car by La Dispute, and this from its very first moments, when we get this spoken word verse by Jordan Dreher, we kind of get an idea of what we're getting into. It's just a very angry work about our need to change things in a world that increasingly feels helpless. It's just some pretty good post-hardcore emo sort of work by a band that is no stranger to the scene at this point. At number 32, we have The Scholars by Car Seat Headrest. This feels like the kind of album that Will Toledo always wanted to make. It's a big, campy, ambitious rock opera with some very nice characterization, some very nice storytelling, a lot of things to say about self-identity, about doing the right thing, about the queer experience. And yeah, there's genuinely like a whole world contained in this album, and you kind of see it on the popular cuts as well, like Devereux, but also on the grander multi-part prog rock pieces like Planet Desperation. At number 31, we have God Does Like Ugly by Jid. This is the follow-up to his now legendary Forever story, which really cemented him as one of the most exciting new voices in hip-hop. The album as a whole is kind of an embrace of ugliness and an exploration of ugliness in all of its forms. And the album structure itself is also, I'm not gonna say ugly, but it's messy, it's unwieldy, but it really does work. We're getting everything from kind of some jazz rap here to Miami bass. We're getting, I believe, 40 producers on here, about a dozen features. It's a big album. It's a big album, but it's able to stay enjoyable for the entirety of its runtime and, say some interesting things as well. At number 30, we have Ego Death at the Bachelorette Party by Hayley Williams. Growing up in the sort of like 2000s, Hayley Williams specifically was just the coolest person you could be. I listened to a lot of Paramore growing up, and honestly, like, I didn't enjoy a lot of Hayley Williams' earlier solo work, like Petals for Armor. I remember giving it a 6 out of 10 on my blog. But I'm so glad that Ego Death turned out to be as good as it did. We have about 20 tracks here, all of them bangers. Just some of that sort of pop rock with, hints of punk here that Hayley Williams just does so well. And just an iconic release strategy to boot. At 29, we have Virgin by Lorde, which, despite not enjoying some of the singles when they came out, they really worked for me in the context of the album as a whole. And as Lorde opted to work with Jim Eastack instead of Jack Antonoff for this album, we are getting a bit more of that unrefined, almost like hyperpop adjacent sound here as well on some tracks. And overall, thematically, it feels like a very raw release, a very honest, vulnerable sort of release. We see that in tracks like Favorite Daughter, in tracks like Clear Blue. At number 28, we have Pain to Power by Meruja or Meruja. Some of the acts within the windmill scene are kind of straying from it, such as Black Country New Road, but Meruja is... I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing their name, but they're still on it, and we are still getting a lot of that sort of anxious vocals, those like tense guitars, very socially conscious lyrics here as well. If you're a fan of that like earlier Black Country New Road sound, you are really gonna enjoy this album as well. At number 27, we have Pirouette by Model Actress. The experience of listening to this album kind of feels like the tail end of a rave when everyone's just feeling like weird and anxious, but everyone still needs to like dance out all their drugs. That's the kind of feeling that this album brings, and it's pretty interesting. It's pretty good work by the band here. At number 26, we have Tranquilizer by Oneohtrix Point Never. I believe a lot of the sounds and samples within this album were lifted directly from sample packs on the Internet Archive. So these are like decade-old sounds, and Oneohtrix Point Never is almost curating them rather than like making them into something completely different. So listening to this album does feel like a trip down memory lane, like navigating through the pages of the early internet. At number 25, we have Hyper Youth by Joey Valence and Bray. We see the duo evolving from that sort of frat rap sound that we saw on No Hands and Punk Tactics. They're still causing a ruckus in the best way possible on cuts like Bust Down and See You Dance, featuring Tia Corrine and Rebecca Black respectively. We see JVB not just have a good time, but also at points reflect on aging, on friendship, on genuine connections. At number 24, we have Lotus by Little Sims. It's her first album after cutting ties with longtime collaborator and producer Inflow over a financial dispute. And the album as a whole really does feel like a distillation of her heartbreak, of her fury, but there's also a lot of more tender cuts that reflect on the more important things in life, like family. Yeah, overall, just a very versatile, very personal, very vulnerable, very angry sort of an album. At number 23, we have a pretty exciting new breakout album, I Love My Computer by Nina Girachi. It sort of lies somewhere between the electropop of albums like Art Angels by Grimes, but then also the bubblegum bass of Charlie XCX, Sophie, the whole like PC music collective, and just rooted in a deep love for that 2010s EDM movement. But it's not just, like sort of festival ready, very clubby tracks here. There's also some pretty interesting themes here about our relationship with technology. One of the singles from this album which was my introduction to Nina Girachi, Fuck My Computer, is just such an outlandish but also hard-hitting track in this modern day and age that we're in. Just a very, very interesting album that grew with me with each listen. At number 22, we have Something Beautiful by Miley Cyrus. I, again, did not expect a Miley Cyrus album to be this high on this list, but Something Beautiful really is something beautiful. It is such an insane, out there kind of album. It's still very rooted in traditional pop, but at the same time, it feels very elevated. A lot of reverb-drenched guitars and Miley's vocals just having a lot of tasteful depth to them. And yeah, as soon as you sort of get that first blaring drop on the title track, you immediately realize, okay, this is not like any of the other like Miley albums. This is really a step above. At number 21, we have Stardust by the legendary Danny Brown, just one of the most likable, talented, most interesting figures in hip-hop today. And Stardust is, of course, very different from his sort of drug-fueled atrocity exhibition, and also very different from the grim explorations on albums like Quadeca. It's just a genuinely joyful collection of pop rap, I guess, or like very hyperpop inspired hip-hop music. We see Danny working with a lot of younger upcoming musicians like Jane Remover, Underscores, Quadeca, Frost Children, and all of these just add so much to, the bouncy, joyful, positive sounding, energetic cuts that we get on Stardust. At number 20, we have Through the Wall by British-Canadian singer Rochelle Jordan. This is, I believe, her third studio LP. It's about 17 tracks long, and just a lot of fun, deep house and UK garage cuts on here, which despite the longer like runtime never really get boring or cumbersome. So we're getting a lot of that four on the floor sort of like club beats on tracks like La Di Da and The Boy, but then also a lot of 90s R&B style tracks like Bite the Beat, which really help mix things up. Overall, the album kind of moves seamlessly from track to track, almost like a DJ mix, and just stays really, really enjoyable throughout. At number 19, we have Debi Terar Mas Photos by Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny is just one of those artists that are somehow able to create music that's super poppy, that works for everyone, but at the same time, they're really forward-thinking in their style and sound. And at the same time, they're, incorporating a lot of traditional elements as well. So, this album is primarily rooted in reggaeton and deep house, but we're also getting a lot of traditional Puerto Rican instrumentation on here. We have some bolero, we have some bomba, some plena, even a live salsa arrangement on cuts like Baile Inolvidable. And also there's a lot of very emotional storytelling on, for instance, the number one hit of this album, DTMF. This is an album that keeps giving and I keep coming back to. At number 18, we have Bleeds by Wednesday. I loved their previous album, Rat Saw God, as well, and while that one had quite a few more like sprawling, brain-melting cuts such as Bull Believer, this one really maintains a sort of tighter form factor. We have frontwoman Carly Hartzman just singing her heart out, waxing poetics about small-time life in the most endearing way possible. At the same time, we're getting those classic, noisy, grungy Wednesday guitars and some drums that just seem to be crashing the whole time, and it does not get boring, it does not get tiring. Each cut just works so well on this album. At number 17, we have Baby by Dijon. Dijon has just been having quite the year. He helped produce the new Bon Iver album, the new Justin Bieber album. He was in the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, but I think his crowning achievement for 2025 has to be this album. Dijon just just has this very specific style and sound where he takes a lot of vocal chops, he takes a lot of acoustic samples, and he just chops and screws and just manipulates them in some very interesting ways. This album is just peak Dijon with some good storytelling mixed in. Overall, it just feels like a celebration of love in all its forms. At number 16, we have Blur by Joanne Robertson. This is one of those rare instances where I listen to an artist and they immediately click. And Blur is just such a beautiful collection of, slowcore, dream pop, ambient pop kind of music that grouper fans would really like have a good time with. But then there are also cello sections featuring Oliver Coates, which just add a very nice sort of soaring kind of element to some of the cuts here as well, and a very surreal vibe overall. This is just a very nice, dreamy, late night sort of an album. At number 15, we have Only Dust Remains by Backwash. This is the Zambian Canadian rapper's 5th studio LP. It has a lot of her signature dark and atmospheric production, as she provides a lot of very poignant musings about queerness and the trans experience, about love and war and genocide, about power, about just a lot of very important, very timely topics. Some standout cuts like Black Lazarus, Disassociation, A History of Violence just have some really good storytelling. And for an album that sounds so dark and is focused on creating like such a deep, specific atmosphere, it's really satisfying to see the amount of depth and wisdom it has as well. At number 14, we have Soft Spot by Honning Badna. This is the Norwegian punk band's 7th LP, and these guys really know how to rock out. Just from the get-go, we're getting angry, dissonant guitars, we're getting thumping beats, we're getting some frantic, urgent poetry about digital dystopias, about corporate coolness, about Christian Valen pulling out an MP5 out of a Ferrari in Marbella. It's just the loudest, most cathartic punk rock album out this year, and just what a fantastic introduction this was for the band. Again, as I said, this is their 7th album, but this is the first time I've heard of them, and I'm definitely gonna go back and check out some of their previous music as well. At number 13, we have Choke Enough by Oklou. Oklou is a classically trained French musician, and you can kind of tell that within the structure of the songs here. We're getting a pretty ethereal fusion of some EDM textures mixed in with a lot of Baroque sensibilities. This is also very subtle, very quiet, very quaint sort of an album, which has a lot of polyphony, has a lot of interesting ebbs and flows, and it's the kind of details that you really only start to appreciate on repeated listens. And much of the record kind of feels like whisperings of sweet nothings, and especially on tracks like Thank You for Recording and Obvious. And because of that, when we do get sort of more complex, synth heavy, clubby kind of tracks like Harvest Sky, it really hits twice as hard. So yeah, just some very beautiful, very pretty sounding pop music here. At number 12, we have Cancionera by Natalia Lafourcade. Natalia Lafourcade has been making music since before I was born, but it was specifically over the past decade or so with albums like Hasta la Raíz, The Musa's Duology, Un Canto por Mexico, that she really hit this hot streak and she became this internationally acclaimed critical darling. And similar to her previous album, De Todas las Flores, Cancionera also adopts this very breezy strain of Latin jazz with a lot of traditional Mexican folk music elements throughout as well. Again, similarly to her previous album, this is also recorded entirely on analog tape in single takes as well. And in some cases, we do get some sort of like background crowd noises in the mix as well, which sometimes create some really cool call and response sections in some of the songs. Overall, it's a very mature, refined sort of an album, touching on topics like aging and past memories, with some sillier tracks like El Coconito added in the mix as well, which again just create a very nice balance overall. At number 11, we have Live, Laugh, Love by Earl Sweatshirt, who really needs no introduction. This just feels like a more positive counterpart to his now considered classic Some Rap Songs from 2018, I believe. We're getting a lot of that same laser sharp wit, a lot of those same abstract, poetic bars on here, with some similarly otherworldly, sample heavy production here as well. And there's also just some downright beautiful, joyful lyricism on here. That one line on Tourmaline that goes like, both my ears ringing with your love. Just in the context of the entire verse and the context of Earl's life right now, is just so happy and so positive, and just it's so nice to see him happy, honestly. And really, I did not expect an Earl Sweatshirt album would have me giggling, kicking my feet, but At number 10, we have the BPM by Sudan Archives. I loved her previous album, Natural Brown Prom Queen, as well, which had a lot more of a funkier kind of a sound. And this one is going for more of an electronic sound, especially rooted in the Detroit club scene. But at the same time, her sort of usual flair for the orchestral does come through in tracks like Dead as well. And overall, the album seems to be dealing with our changing relationship with technology, such as on cuts like A Computer Love. But in any case, it's just a very refined, very richly produced, very danceable, bop your head along to it sort of collection of dance tracks. Sudan Archives, again, just makes it her own, and it just makes it enjoyable throughout. This is, I think, the most tightly put together electronic album of the year for me. And at number 9, we have Willoughby Tucker, I'll Always Love You by Ethel Cain. I believe this is the prequel to her planned trilogy of albums, and similar to what we got on her Perverts EP earlier this year, we're getting a lot more dronier, a lot more ambient cuts here as well, some fully instrumental tracks like Radio Towers that really work in the context of the album. But aside from that, there's just a lot of very vivid storytelling on here about generational trauma, about first loves and first heartbreaks, as Hayden sort of builds up some of the primary characters in her trilogy. And we do get a lot of nods to past slowcore greats. There's a lot of low type elements on cuts like Jamie, and some hints of Red House Painters as well, such as on the track A Knock at the Door. But the sound overall still feels very uniquely Ethel Cain. And additionally, I think the album just has some of Hayden's best songwriting to date. Nettles is obviously a massive standout. That one line about how that picture on the wall you're scared of looks just like you says so much about generational trauma. There's lines on this album which say more than a full verse might on a lesser artist album. It's just beautifully written, some gorgeous slowcore on here, just really, really enjoyable. And at number 8, we have Birthing by Swans. This is a legendary experimental rock fit that if you haven't heard of yet, you really need to. At this point, I think Michael Gira is in his 70s, and this new latest era of Swans, which started, I believe, in the early 2010s with My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky, but also most famously heard in albums like To Be Kind and The Seer, is sort of coming to an end. This is supposedly the last Big Sound album that Michael Gira and co will be releasing. And listen, when a person with this much life experience makes an album about, birthing, about life and death, you really need to sit down, shut up, and listen. It's just a sprawling, massive release across its 7 tracks and mammoth 2-hour runtime. The band is building walls of sound. They're crashing drums, they're striking tambourines, they're groaning and moaning and wailing and screaming as they reflect on motherly instincts, on grief, on the sacred and profane, and seemingly on one of the album's standout tracks, on Donald Trump, in some pretty interesting, pretty poetic ways. Birthing is just a grand closure to this Big Sound era, and I really hope Michael Gira takes a break after this, and whenever he does return, I'm sure it's gonna be good stuff as well. But what a way to end this era of Swans. At number 7, we have Magic Alive by McKinley Dixon. His sophomore album really cements him as one of the most exciting new voices in jazz rap. And this is a concept album about 3 friends who find out that a fourth has passed away and try to bring him back to life. And the album is kind of told in very vivid vignettes and in a very non-linear sort of fashion. So it kind of does feel like you're going back to childhood memories. And Dixon is very obviously a pretty well-read person. You see a lot of Toni Morrison inspirations come through in his songwriting. The production is very jazzy, very breezy, very beautifully put together. One of the most childlike, nostalgic, pretty sounding rap albums that you'll hear maybe ever. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of music. And at number 6, we have Heavy Metal by Cameron Winter, which I know technically it came out in December 2024. Usually when I'm putting these lists together, I have a cutoff period around late November, so I wasn't able to put it on that year's list, but I do feel like I need to put it here. And between when I first heard heavy metal in January of this year to now, Cameron Winter has kind of ballooned into this pop culture icon, and for good reason too. This is one of those painstakingly good singer-songwriter albums that really don't come around very often. It's filled with achingly beautiful stream of consciousness lyrics, which really remind me a lot of the late great Leonard Cohen in some ways. You know, whether he's a forlorn romantic on Love Takes Smiles, or the titular heavy metal man on Cancer of the Skull, or an acolyte on $0, Winter will keep you hooked throughout the album, and he'll keep, taking the meaning out of words and using them in some pretty new, interesting, cryptic ways. A lot of the lyricism on this album is very cryptic at times, but it's just also very poetic, very beautifully put together. I hate to say it, man. He's younger than me, but he's the voice of our generation. I mean, not that I ever thought I was like in the competition, but you know how like sometimes you see people like younger than you be like this smart and this clever and this successful, and there is a level of envy there, I guess. But I love this album, man. I can't sing enough praises about it. At number 5, we have Lonely People with Power by Deaf Heaven. As pioneers of the death gaze subgenre, the band really doesn't have anything left to prove at this point. They've been evolving their sound and style consistently since 2013 Sunbather. They kind of experimented with tenderness a bit on 2018's Ordinary Corrupt Human Love before just fully nosediving into a slow gaze on 2021's Infinite Granite. And Lonely People with Power seems to combine all of these different styles and sounds and produce something that's really more than the sum of its parts. There is some serious shredding and some serious screamo singing on cuts like Magnolia and The Garden Route, but then there are also softer, more tender, more shoegazy cuts as well, such as on Heathen, that really showcase frontman George Clark's vocal range, and when sandwiched between these moments of intensity, this bring a nice overall balance to the mix. At number 4, we have my gym album of the year, Revenge Seekers by Jane Remover. After she took a bit of a dream pop detour on 2023's Census Designated, Revenge Seekers does simultaneously feel like a return to her digicore roots, but at the same time, the album is really pushing digicore to its limits. We're getting elements of EDM here, we're getting rage, we're getting hardcore, we're getting some bubblegum bass, we're getting some experimental hip-hop, and overall it's just a very loud, very layered, very chaotic kind of an album. Just an overstimulating experience overall. It's filled with some batshit insane production choices, just the randomest like video game samples on here, some buttery smooth flows, some catchy melodies. The bars themselves are, I don't know, like Jane Remover is such an interesting songwriter. They will reference Pokemon and George Michael and some 90s horror films as they talk about, revenge, obviously, but then also parasocial relationships, fame in the internet age, self-identity, social perceptions. They touch on a lot of very interesting themes, but they also keep the entire experience very fun. It's the kind of album that would make a Victorian child spontaneously combust if they heard it. But man, I loved it. I cannot get enough of this album. It might not be for everyone, but really, if you get it, you get it. It's just, it's a banger. It really is. At number 3, we have Let God Sort Him Out by Clips. In 2009, at the peak of their fame, Clips disbanded after one of the brothers in the duo Malice, he retired from hip hop, and Pusha T went on to have a pretty successful solo career, particularly catapulted by his early involvement in Kanye West's Good Music label. Since then, he's made some pretty solid solo works as well, particularly Daytona, but after a decade and a half, after the duo began working on a comeback album, there was a period of tension in between when they had some label issues due to their refusal to censor some of the bars on this album. But as of 2025, Let God Sort Him Out is finally out, and man, what an album this is. What a comeback this is. The duo's chemistry is fully intact. Their verses complement each other perfectly, particularly, on the opening track, The Birds Don't Sing, which is really one of the maybe only emotional cuts on the album. And, their technical proficiency as a duo is on full display here as well. We're getting some hard-hitting bars, some dense internal rhyme schemes, some very expressive inflection. Even the features are all great. We have Nas on here, we have Kendrick on just an insane verse, we have Tyler the Creator on here as well, we have longtime collaborator Pharrell Williams doing the production, who as part of the Neptunes produced a lot of Clips' early music as well. And with his sort of like groovy drum patterns, with his ability to pick out very interesting samples that always seem to like work really well, combining all of that with the duo's technical proficiency with some strong features, everyone is bringing their A game on this album. Every track on here is just a banger. Truly like a zero skips album, and in my opinion, the best rap album of the year. And then moving on to number 2, since I mentioned heavy metal, this was going to come up as well. We have, of course, Getting Killed by Geese. And if you listen to Geese's previous album, 3D Country, and then you listen to heavy metal, and then you listen to this, you can very easily tell how the success of heavy metal influenced this album as well. Like the sort of stream of consciousness style of lyricism has been turned up. The general strangeness in the strong structures has been turned up as well. But at the same time, this does feel like a Geese album. It doesn't feel like a cop-out in that sense. And with Kenneth Bloom, formerly known as Kenny Beats, helping with a lot of the production on this album, we do get a lot of that sort of, unrefined, rough around the edges sound to some of the songs, which really gives it a sort of homemade kind of a feel. And the band themselves are just so wildly energetic throughout, on the opening cut. Just starting off the album with something like There's a Bomb in My Car, there's nowhere to go but up from there. And there's a lot of, punk-ish elements to the album as well, particularly on cuts like 100 Horses, where Cameron Winter is kind of cosplaying as this military dictator kind of a figure, almost ordering his troops to keep dancing or else, There's that one line about how there is only dance music in times of war, which just the way he says it, just stuck with me. And then, you have some moments of yearning and tenderness as well, such as on cuts like Opaidu Cocaine, where that you can change, but still choose me refrain just works so beautifully. And if there's one line that really sums up the entirety of 2025, or it's a line that I guess everyone needs to hear, it's that one reworking of a Latin proverb on taxes. It's a sort of critique of hypocrisy. Doctor, heal yourself. And finally, at number 1, my overall pick for the best album of 2025 is one that doesn't just feel timely, but also seemingly predicts the shape of pop to come. It's a deeply feminine, mystical, and honestly overwhelming collection of tracks that genuinely feels transcendental at times. Recorded in nearly a dozen studios, sung in over a dozen languages, Rosalia's Lux is, in my humble opinion, her magnum opus, the best album of the year, and possibly one of the best pop albums of the decade so far. By her 4th LP, it has become pretty evident that Rosalia is great at predicting pop trends. For instance, after the release of Motomami, we saw a lot more Latin influences in pop music worldwide. And on Lux as well, her strain of art pop is very different from what's in vogue right now. It's not at all, bedroomy or even like hyperpop adjacent. Instead, Rosalia veers completely into the other direction, mixing in a lot of very heavy orchestral, very classical elements into her music, most notably on tracks like Berghain. Even the album structure itself takes from the operatic tradition with its sort of four-part movement. And of course, Rosalia shows off her insane vocal skills. She was trained as a classical musician growing up, and you really see that on cuts like, for instance, Mio Cristo Piangi Diamante. And there are some great features and collaborations on the album too. Overall, the vibes are very maximalist, very forward-thinking. There really isn't a single verse, a single chord progression, a single production choice that feels out of place, or that feels like, oh, it could have been done better. Beautiful, maximalist, just no holes barred pop music here. And yeah, Lux by Rosalia, my #1 album of 2025. Just beautiful, beautiful work here. And there you have it. Those are my top 50 favorite albums of the year. Again, obviously, all of this is very subjective. Whether you agreed with me or not, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. And honestly, for me, overall, just on a personal note to close the year out, this has been a pretty intense year. And, because of my work, I really don't get a lot of time to make as much content as I would like to. But, one of my resolutions for 2026 is to at least try and put out a monthly video if I can. So at least 12 videos for 2026. I'm trying to set a more realistic goal, just so I can actually keep it this time and actually, achieve it. But yeah, I'm not sure what format some of that content would be in, maybe like mini documentaries, maybe even some interviews, maybe, listicles like this one as well. In any case, I wanted to thank you all for sticking around all this time. Whether you're new to the channel, whether you've been a sort of long time viewer, I really, really appreciate you all. You keep me going essentially, and I wish you all a happy new year. Thanks for watching.